start with MVVM and then I change it up a little bit. It's still a slightly tweaked version of it. Let's just start with the basics, the outer layer, all right, which is the services and entities. So this is the most external layer of your app. So services interact with external sources. They handle HTTP requests, they call native code, or they work with device sensors. Doesn't matter. Whatever you do on an API, on a database, or on your device, which is external to the app, you do it in a service. All right? What services do is get the data from whatever you want and put them into entities. Entities are often also called models. They're just immutable classes that hold the data and pass it on the next layer. The next layer is going to be the view models. I told you that the architecture is just a slightly tweaked version of MVVM, so we still have view models. And what they do is they are the state management part. They manage the state of the UI. That's all they do. They get their info and data from services and entities and handle the state of the UI. You can do it with any library you want, actually. You can do it with provider, with block, I think Gedix is a bit more complex, but I choose Riverpod. I use Riverpod in all my production apps currently, and we are going to use this in this example. So view models will handle all the state for the UI to display. Next, we'll pass to widgets, finally. So it's simply 3 blocks, right? Services, view models, widgets. Widgets, you know what they do. They render the UI on the screen. That's all. What this allows us to do and why this is important is because we can differentiate strongly between data flow and request flow or call flow, all right? So the calls will go from widgets to services, passing through the view models, of course, and the data will flow from services back to the widgets. We've got a cycle, nothing is mixed up, and that is what architecture is all about. Is it clear enough? That's all there is to it, actually. My architecture is based on that. It's really, really simple. And that's, I think, it's important, especially for beginning, because it's simple, but it's powerful and scales well on production apps also, which is important. Okay, so let's move to the code. I think it's fair to move to the code. In order to do that, I think I can just close that. All right, we are in the code. You see now an unimplemented error. That's normal. We are going to fix that. What we are going to implement is a simple app that displays random cats images gotten from an API. Okay, something I wanted to keep it as simple as possible to really focus on the architecture. And in the docs folder here, I have a txt file which displays the API, what it does. Okay, so what I normally do is to define the entities first. All right. So we're gonna have the response entity. We're gonna put it in the entities folder. So we're going to create a new file and call it, let's say, cat API response. Let's give it like this. Response.dart. Let me move this part here like this, so we have it available to us, and of course this is going to be commented out. And let's start writing our model. It's pretty easy. By the way, I've enabled null safety on this app, so we're gonna write null safe code. It's not really different to the normal code apart from a few keywords. Let's start writing a class. We'll have a cat API response class, which is going to have 3 parameters. The API is going to return something like this with a URL, WebP URL, and ID. URL and WebP URL are both strings, while the ID is going to be an integer. So, simple as that. We're going to define our response class. We're going to have a string URL, a WebP URL, and finally an ID. Should be pretty straightforward for now. Then we need to create a constructor. So we'll have something like this, where because we use null safety, we need to require the specific values. That's something you wouldn't do in the old Dart, but we do it now because we assert that these values are never going to be null. So require this URL, again required this dot WebP URL, and finally required this dot ID. Should be pretty clear for now. There's one more thing we need to put in this class. The extra method we need to declare here is a factory, and we are going to call this from JSON, and this is going to take a map string dynamic data. The maps are basically Dart's representation of JSON, and it's going to return an object of cat API response by taking the data from the map. So this is going to be data ID, yes, or we're going to specify a constant one. The URL is going to be taken again from data URL, or we pass an empty string. One thing, these keywords, they are taken directly from here. They're actually copied from here because this is the API we're going to get. This is the map we are going to get from the API, and we are accessing these IDs. Just to clarify that. And finally, WebP URL is going to be the WebP URL keyword. No, not 0. All right. That's all there is to the model. We need to move now to the service. So we're going to define here in the services folder a new file. We're going to call it cat API service.dart, and let's get this URL that is going to be needed for the API. Let me close this stuff. All right. What are we going to do here? We are still defining another class, the cat API service class, We are going to declare a private instance of it. So we're going to have a private constructor, which is specified in Dart like this. The name of a constructor must match the name of the enclosing class. What I wrote response. All right. Service, of course. Okay, and then I'm doing this so we can get a static instance of it. We're going to define the static instance of the class. So we're going to have a static final instance, which is going to return the cat API service private constructor. That's it. A future function. It is going to return a cat API response object. This method is going to be called get cat image. I can type. All right. It's going to be async, and that's the declaration. Let me close this one so we have more space for the code. And all it is going to do is going to get the response from the URL I forgot to paste in. We're going to do it now. We also need to import the IO dot get and URL. And here we're going to have the URL. Have I? Yes. Here we go. Expect the class member. Okay, I've got equal sign. All right. We need to await that, of course. Okay. And then what we are doing with the response, we are just getting the data and returning it through the cat API response dot from what's this actually? Let me have a cat API response. I don't know why it is giving it to me with this with API capitalized. Doesn't make sense. Should be like this. Dot from JSON, and then we're going to pass the response dot data. That's all. This is basically going to be the service because the API is really simple. We don't need to do much more than this. We get the image and we now see how to display it. In order to display it, we're going to create a provider. Yes, so we're going to define another file, the cat API providers.dart. And with RiverPod it's really easy to define providers, because all we need to do is to declare a cat API provider, a variable actually. This is going to be equal to a future provider. I'll tell you why in a second. Thank you for following. We don't need anything passed to that, and that is going to return something. This syntax may be new for you if you've never used RiverPod. It is a way for declaring providers. Future provider is a provider that returns a future and will come in handy in the widgets part. I'll show you how. One thing I want to add is this auto dispose, because auto dispose manages the disposal by itself when it isn't used anymore, which is really a great thing, so you don't risk having memory leaks or anything. All right, let's implement the provider. So what we need to do is get the instance of the service, the one we've declared in a static variable. So we can get it like this: cat API service.instance. And then what we need to do is simply return cat service.get cat image. One thing you need for RiverPod in your main file around the my app, when you call run app, you need to wrap my app with a provider scope. This is where all providers live in RiverPod. It's really convenient because you can access them really from anywhere. Let's move to the last part. As you can see, the first widget, the my app widget, doesn't do nothing except calling the home page. So we're going to move to the home page, which is also really simple. It is, well, you'll see what it is. Let's remove this unimplemented error, okay? In order to use the provider, instead of extending a stateless widget, we are going to extend a consumer widget. Consumer widgets handle providers and get in the build method not only the context but also another reference to all the providers, which are going to call watch, okay, because it watches the providers you pass to it. This makes it really easy to get the provider we defined before, because we can just type we can just do it like this: final provider equals watch, and pass to watch the how did they call it, cat API provider. That's it. That's how we access the provider. We're going to call it cat provider, and now we can use it. And the nice thing about the future provider that I was telling you before is that when you type cat provider, you get this when. When does something really interesting because it has these three parameters. And these are the widgets it returns when there is data, when it is loading, and when there's an error. It's really convenient to handle futures. Previously, you would need a future builder and you would do all that if statement stuff to handle all the different cases. With RiverPod, you don't need that. You just have this syntax here, which is one of the main things that got me to switch from provider to RiverPod, because it's really convenient. So we're going to have the data, and we need to decide what to return here. What to return here, it's actually really simple. We're going to have an image from the network with a network constant, okay. And the source, it's going to be data, which is, by the way, of type cat API response, as you can see here. And we're going to get the WebP URL, because it's a bit lighter, the WebP image, and Chrome can handle that. The loading part will return a circular progress indicator, because we don't need anything more than that, really. And the error, we can handle it with any other widget. We can call a error screen widget or whatever. We can define it here. Doesn't really matter. Normally I would define it in a different file, but it's not the case. We're going to return a container with a red container. Alright, nothing more than that. Error screen, what's the problem here? The argument type screen is a function. No. The problem is that I missed two parameters here, which we aren't going to need. And that's all there is to it. we've got our cats in the frame. One thing I wanna show you is that with this floating action button here, we can actually refresh the image. We can't do it right now. We're going to implement that next. So the floating action button is here. There's nothing in the it doesn't do anything when it's pressed. We are going to define that. Let's define, I normally do it like this to make it more readable. I declare another function outside of the build method. We are going to need to pass to it a context, and we'll do stuff in here. In the onPressed, we are simply going to call this refresh method, which is a private method, and we'll pass the context. Let's implement this refresh. Again, thanks to Riverpod, it's really simple to refresh a future provider. All you do is to call context.refresh, and refresh forces a provider to re-evaluate. You can read it in the docs here. And pass the provider, which in our case is the cat API provider. Here, one line. Now we hit refresh, and we get, first of all, we get the spinning circular progress indicator because the provider is loading, and then we get the image displayed, and it refreshes every time we click. Oh, this is fun. We click the refresh button. This is the basic architecture. We started once again from the model. We defined our model with our from.json method. We moved to the services, to implementing the services, which are here, from where we get our data from the API and return an object, the cat API response we defined earlier. Then we created a provider to call the API, the service, and actually in order to be more precise, we are going to call a future provider, which is going to provide that when syntax, that it's really convenient. And finally, we put it in a widget. That's all there is to it. Really a simple architecture, I think. It should be really understandable. Thank you guys. Thank you for joining me. And I'll see you soon.